The pipeline didn't just explode, it announced itself. 200 feet of orange fire tore into the Iraqi desert sky, and Staff Sergeant Maya Carter pressed flat against the pump tower's corroded steel, scope still on her eye, breath locked in her chest. She counted the militia moving below. 12, 15, too many to stop. Then her thermal feed caught something else. One heat signature, separate from the rest, elevated, motionless, not militia, a sniper. And he wasn't watching the explosion, he was watching her. The radio crackled. Maya. Grizz's voice was quiet, too quiet. Command just changed the mission. She waited. You're not just hunting a rogue commander anymore. A long pause. You're standing on top of the world's most valuable oil war. The helicopter didn't land. It hovered 6 feet off the ground for exactly 4 seconds, and Maya Carter dropped into the dark with 43 pounds of gear strapped to her body. The rotors kicked a wall of sand across her face. She hit the ground running, head low, and the Black Hawk was already climbing before she'd taken 10 steps. She didn't look back. The desert swallowed her whole. This was the Al-Basra Corridor, the stretch of southern Iraq where the oil fields ran so deep and so wide that the ground itself felt combustible. She'd read the briefing 3 times on the flight out. She'd grown up in West Texas, outside Odessa, where the pump jacks never stopped and the air always tasted faintly of crude. She knew this smell, heavy, metallic, ancient, like the earth was bleeding something it had been keeping secret for 100 million years. She moved east, across broken terrain. The landscape was wrong in a way that took her a moment to identify. Too industrial, too scarred. What should have been open desert was fractured by rusting pipeline segments, collapsed concrete berm walls, and the skeletal frames of pump stations that hadn't operated in years. Some of the structures were recent damage, blast craters still sharp-edged, steel still bright where it had been torn apart. Some were older, Gulf War relics that nobody had bothered to clear. Between them, distant and orange, the gas flare towers burned. They were always burning out here. Even in peacetime, the excess gas from oil extraction had to go somewhere. The towers vented it into the atmosphere in a continuous, indifferent flame. Tonight there were 7 of them visible from her position, throwing just enough light to make the darkness complicated, just enough to confuse thermal optics, just enough to give a sniper problems she hadn't planned for. She filed that away. Her objective was the abandoned pump station designated Overwatch Alpha, a 3-story steel and concrete structure on a low ridge approximately 900 meters north of the main pipeline artery. Intelligence said the upper level gave clear sight lines across 4 kilometers of the operational zone. Intelligence also said the structure was unstable. She took the stairs anyway. The metal groaned under her boots. The second-floor landing had partially collapsed inward, leaving a gap she had to step across carefully, her rifle slung, both hands on the rusted handrail. The smell up here was different, closer to copper than crude. Something had died in this building not long ago. She didn't stop to investigate. The 3rd level was open to the sky on the eastern side where the wall had come down. That made it drafty and exposed. It also made it perfect. She set up her position in the northwest corner. Bipod down, rifle stable on a section of concrete rubble, she shaped with her boot into a solid rest. She ranged the key terrain features automatically, the way muscle memory works when you've been doing something for 6 years. Pipeline junction at 1,100 meters, secondary pump station at 1,740 meters, the dark cluster of vehicles she'd spotted on approach at 2,200 meters. She keyed her radio. Grizz, Alpha is set, eyes on. A pause, then, copy Maya, good to hear your voice. Chief Warrant Officer Daniel Mercer's voice was like gravel dragged across old wood. 62 years old, retired Marine Scout sniper with confirmed kills across 3 decades in 2 continents, now operating as a CIA field advisor from a position she wasn't authorized to know. She'd worked with him twice before. She trusted him the way you trust a man who's already proven he'll bleed for you. "What's the weather looking like on your end?" she asked. "Ugly," he said. "Winds picking up from the southwest. Sandstorm building. You've got maybe 6 hours of clean glass before it gets complicated." "Understood." She settled behind the scope. "Talk to me about the target." "I will," Grizz said. "But first, tell me what you see." What she saw at 2,200 meters was a convoy that didn't move like militia. Most irregular forces in this corridor moved fast and loose. Vehicles spread out, no formation discipline, weapons hanging out windows. These vehicles were tight, 3 trucks evenly spaced, moving at a consistent speed. The lead truck stopped. The trailing truck stopped exactly 2 seconds later. "Trained," she said into the radio. "Very," Grizz confirmed. "That's a Quds Force logistics element. They've been operating in this sector for 11 days, running supplies to a forward command position we haven't been able to pin down yet." "And the man running the command position?" "Colonel Farhad Vaziri." Grizz said the name the way you say something you've had in your mouth for too long. 44 years old, Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, Quds Force, elevated to colonel 6 years ago after operations in Syria. He was, a logistics and infrastructure specialist, not a fighter. Was? His current mission isn't logistics. A pause, and she heard Grizz shift on his end. "Maya, the official tasking is this. You confirm Vaziri's presence and identity, you assess the threat to infrastructure, and if command authorizes, you take a long-range neutralization shot. Standard JSOC support protocol." She knew what that meant. She'd done it before. What she heard in Grizz's voice was the part he wasn't saying yet. "And the unofficial tasking?" she asked. "Understand the full picture before you pull that trigger." Another pause, longer this time. "I've been watching this situation for 3 weeks. Things here are not what the briefing says they are." She kept her eye on the convoy. "Define not what they say." "The pipeline sabotage events over the past month, the ones being attributed to Vaziri's network, they don't fit his profile. He's a builder, not a destroyer. He spent 15 years developing Iranian energy infrastructure. He knows what these pipelines are worth. He wouldn't blow them up any more than a surgeon would cut a patient's throat. Unless someone ordered him to." "Unless someone ordered him to," Grizz agreed. "Or unless someone else is doing the blowing up and using his name." The convoy reached a junction point and split. 2 trucks went south. One went north toward the dark cluster of pump buildings she'd been watching. "What's my mission tonight, Grizz?" "Watch, learn, confirm or deny." A pause. "Do not shoot anyone until I tell you we understand what we're actually looking at." She breathed out slowly. "Copy." For 3 hours she watched. The desert at night had its own logic. At first it looked like darkness, then like movement. Then if you held still long enough and let your eyes adjust to the scope's light amplification rather than fighting it, it became something like a map. The flame towers were fixed reference points. The militia patrol routes became predictable within 40 minutes. She'd time them, log them in the small notepad she kept in her left breast pocket. The civilian truck traffic on the secondary road to the east was heavier than it should have been. That last part bothered her. Grizz, the secondary road, Eastern Grid, reference my last upload. What about it? I've counted 11 civilian trucks in the past 2 hours, all heading north, none coming back south. A pause on his end. She could hear him cross-referencing something. What time of night do civilians drive supply trucks north toward an active militia zone? They don't, she said. Not unless they're not actually civilians. Or, Grizz said carefully, not unless someone is paying them enough to make the risk feel worth it. She watched the road. Another truck. Old, commercial, the kind of flatbed that moved construction materials or agricultural supplies. Moving at a careful speed, no lights. What are they carrying? That, Grizz said, is the right question. She tracked the truck until it turned off the secondary road and disappeared behind a low berm. She marked the turn point on her range card. The truck didn't emerge on the other side of the berm. There was a building behind it, one she'd logged as a derelict water treatment facility, supposedly non-operational. But the truck went in, and the truck stayed in. There's a staging point behind the water treatment facility, grid reference Delta 7. Copy. I'm logging it. A pause. Maya, there's something else I want you to look for. The supply convoys Vaziri's unit is running. Look at the crates they're offloading. The markings. What kind of markings? Grizz was quiet for a moment. Just look, and tell me what you see. She adjusted her scope to the northern pump building, where she'd tracked the single truck from the split convoy. 2 men had gotten out. They were offloading something into the building through a side door. The crates were long, rectangular, olive drab. She upped her magnification. The markings on the nearest crate were partially obscured by weathering and what looked like deliberate paint, but the stencil format underneath was unmistakable. She'd seen it 10,000 times. U.S. Army supply markings. She didn't say anything for a moment. Grizz, tell me. The crates they're moving into the northern pump building. She kept her voice flat. They've been painted over, but the stencil format underneath is American. The silence on the other end lasted long enough that she double-checked her radio connection. Grizz, I hear you. His voice was quieter now. How many crates? At least 8, maybe more inside. Another long silence. Okay, he said finally. Okay, that changes tonight's timeline. A pause. Maya, I need you to hold your position and keep observing. Do not engage. Not yet. She took her eye off the scope and pressed her back against the concrete wall. Above her, the desert sky was enormous and indifferent, the stars beginning to blur at the edges as the clouds moved in from the southwest. She'd been in theater for 4 hours, and nothing about this mission was what she'd been told it was. It came from the southwest the way Grizz had warned. Not a wall, the movies always showed it as a wall, but a gradual thickening of the air, a brownish quality entering the darkness, sand grains that started tapping against her exposed skin like very fine rain. Then it hit properly. The visibility dropped from 4 kilometers to less than 200 meters in under 3 minutes. Her thermal scope, which worked on heat differentials, suddenly became almost useless. The blowing sand absorbed and scattered heat signatures, turning everything into a shifting, grainy ghost image that she couldn't trust. She tightened the balaclava across her face and kept her eye at the scope anyway, because habit is habit. Through the storm-degraded feed, she saw something, or thought she saw something. On the ridge to her northeast, approximately 600 meters, there was a structure she'd logged as a collapsed pump housing. Open framework, no roof, walls barely standing. She'd dismissed it as uninhabitable. Now, through the thermal static of the blowing sand, she was picking up a faint signature inside that structure. Faint, intermittent, the kind of reading you second guess. She held on it for 2 full minutes. The signature didn't move, didn't shift, didn't behave the way ambient heat from machinery or residual warmth from sun-baked metal would behave. It held a position, like a person holds a position. She keyed the radio. Grizz, Northeast Ridge, 600 meters, collapsed pump housing. I've got a possible thermal contact, very faint, could be interference from the storm. Could be, Grizz said, or couldn't be. I can't confirm in these conditions. Copy. A pause. Log it. Hold your position. Let the storm work. She didn't love that answer, but she logged it, marked the grid reference, and held. The storm was doing something useful, she reminded herself. It was degrading her optics. It was also degrading everyone else's. If there was someone on that northeast ridge looking back at her, their visibility was just as compromised. Or it should have been. She kept coming back to that signature, the stillness of it, the discipline of it. A person waiting out a sandstorm didn't hold completely motionless. They shifted weight, they adjusted their clothing, they moved. This didn't. The explosion came at 03:47 hours. Not the pump station she'd been watching, not the convoy route, the main pipeline artery, the one running east-west 2 kilometers south of her position, detonated in a sequence. 3 separate blast points, spaced approximately 400 meters apart, going off within 6 seconds of each other. The sound hit her as concussion first, then noise. The pump tower shuddered. A section of already compromised wall on the eastern side of the 3rd floor cracked and dropped, concrete pieces grinding past her position. She pressed flat, waited for the structure to decide whether it was going to keep standing. It kept standing. She got back to her scope. The pipeline was burning. 3 separate infernos, the center one largest, a column of fire and black smoke pushing 300 feet into the clearing sky. The storm had passed, she realized, while she'd been focused on the northeast ridge. Clean air now. Her thermals were back. The militia were moving. Not running, moving with purpose. Vehicles from the staging areas she'd identified were already in motion, driving toward the pipeline breach points. Personnel dismounting, taking up perimeter positions. This had the structure of a prepared response, not a reaction to surprise. Grizz, pipeline detonation, 3 points, militia responding. This looks staged. It is staged, Grizz said, and his voice was tight in a way she hadn't heard before. Maya, I need you to find Vaziri. He'll be moving now. Where is he? She swept her scope across the militia activity. Personnel on foot, vehicles repositioning, a cluster of figures near the largest blast point that appeared to be taking photographs or video. She noted that, filed it. Then, at the secondary pump station, 1,740 meters, a vehicle she hadn't logged before. Black, late model Toyota Land Cruiser. 3 men on foot near it. The center man was not militia, not in posture, not in clothing. He stood with his hands clasped behind his back, watching the burning pipeline with an expression she could read even at range, even through a scope. This was not a man watching something he'd done. This was a man watching something he'd expected but not ordered. Northwest of the main blast, secondary pump station, the one in the center. Grizz was quiet for a moment. Description: medium height, older, maybe mid-40s, standing very still. 2 guards, not very close. That's him. A pause. Maya, what's around him? She widened her scan. Militia personnel, but also civilians, at least 20, in the open between the pipeline and the pump station. They're not running, they're just standing there. Herded, Grizz said flatly. Yeah. So you can't shoot. She didn't answer because the answer was obvious. At 1,740 meters in ambient light conditions, with 20 non-combatants in a kill zone that she couldn't completely map, no, she couldn't shoot. Not cleanly. Not without certainty she didn't have. Hold, Grizz said. Don't lose him. She held. Vaziri stood at the edge of the firelight, watching his oil war burn, and she held her crosshairs just above his right shoulder and waited for the tactical situation to change. It didn't change fast enough. The Land Cruiser's engine started. The 2 guards moved toward it. Vaziri took one last look at the burning pipeline, and something in the deliberateness of that look, the way he turned, the way his shoulders settled, told her something she couldn't have articulated. He looked like a man saying goodbye. The vehicle moved. She tracked it as long as she could before terrain swallowed it. At 0412 hours, the comms died. Not static, not degradation. Clean cutoff, the kind that meant active jamming, not equipment failure. One moment Grizz's voice, the next, Silence so complete it felt like pressure in her ears. She tried the backup frequency. Nothing. She tried the emergency burst protocol, a 5-second automated ping to the relay satellite. The indicator light on her radio blinked twice, which meant the signal was transmitting. It didn't blink a third time, which meant nothing was receiving it. Someone had put up a jamming umbrella over this sector. That required equipment. That required planning. That was not a capability available to standard militia operations. She stayed in position. Moving without comms was its own kind of risk. If she displaced and Grizz reestablished contact, she'd be where she wasn't supposed to be. And in her experience, being where you weren't supposed to be in a hot zone was how operators got killed by their own side. She stayed, and she watched, and she thought. What she thought about was the U.S. Army stenciling on those crates. Supply chains were accountable. Every U.S. military item had a chain of custody. Crates didn't wander across international borders and end up in Iranian militia staging areas by accident. They got there because someone moved them, and someone moving U.S. military equipment to an Iranian proxy force was committing a federal crime that went so far above her pay grade, she couldn't see the top of it. But if you were going to manipulate an oil war, if you were going to drive energy prices, destabilize a corridor, create a crisis that justified intervention or withdrawal, depending on which side of the ledger you sat on, U.S. equipment in Iranian hands was exactly the kind of controlled leak that served multiple narratives simultaneously. She thought about Grizz saying, "Things here are not what the briefing says they are." She thought about Vaziri standing at the pipeline fire like a man watching something he hadn't ordered. The jamming held. She stayed in position. The burning pipeline threw red-orange light across 2 kilometers of desert, and somewhere in the dark between her and the fire, the northeast ridge held its silence. The comms came back at 05:09 hours. Not a gradual return, another clean cutoff in the opposite direction. One moment silence, the next the carrier frequency reestablished and Grizz's voice coming through immediately, as though he'd been waiting. "Maya, status." "Stationary. All night. Lost Vaziri's vehicle at approximately 0420. No further visual." "Copy. I know where he went." A pause. "Are you intact?" "Yes. What happened to comms?" "Jamming. Someone activated a military-grade suppression system at 0412, lifted it at 0509. That equipment doesn't belong to Quds Force or any proxy we've identified in this corridor." She already knew what he was implying. She said it anyway. "So who does it belong to?" "Working on that." His voice was careful in a way that told her he wasn't working on it. He already knew, and he was deciding what to tell her. "Maya, I need you to do something before you extract from that position." "Go ahead." "North of your overwatch, about 400 meters, there's a cluster of storage buildings adjacent to the northern pump station, the one you were watching during the convoy activity. I need you to get eyes on the loading dock area." She checked her range card. She had that dock logged. "What am I looking for?" "One of the supply trucks that came in from the secondary road during the night. The one that went to the water treatment facility and didn't come back out." She paused. "It's at the pump station?" "It moved during the jamming window. I have overhead imagery from before and after. The truck relocated." A pause. "Maya, the crates it was carrying. I need you to look at the markings on whatever they offloaded." She moved. She came off the pump tower carefully, taking the staircase with patient deliberation, because a fall here, alone and without comms backup, would end the mission and probably end her. She crossed the 400 meters in low terrain, using the berm lines and pipeline sections as cover, moving slowly enough that she wasn't kicking up a dust signature in the lightning pre-dawn air. The loading dock was on the western face of the pump station. She came to it from the south, working her way along a collapsed concrete wall until she had a sightline. The crates were stacked in the open. 6 of them. The paint-over job was visible even without the scope. Brush applied, Olive drab over olive drab, the kind of hasty obscurement that worked at distance but fell apart up close. Underneath the painted surface, the stenciling was still readable on the two crates at the bottom of the stack, where the paint had run thin. She read it twice to make sure she was reading it right. Not just supply markings, not just military issue stamps, manufacturer codes, batch numbers, contract identification strings. She knew those contract identifiers. She'd seen them before, on legitimate resupply manifests in a different theater 3 years ago. They belonged to a U.S. defense contractor that had been awarded infrastructure security contracts throughout the Middle East. A company with a particularly robust lobbying presence in Washington. A company whose stock tended to move in interesting ways around regional instability events. She photographed everything she could with her lens-mounted camera module. Then she pulled back the way she'd come and got back on the radio. Grizz, the crates at the pump station dock. They're not black market. They're contractor-sourced. Current generation, current contracts. She read him the batch numbers. The silence on his end was the longest one yet. Grizz, I'm here. His voice had changed. It wasn't careful anymore. It was something she'd never heard from him before. Something that sounded like the specific exhaustion of a man who has just confirmed something he'd hoped he was wrong about. Maya, I want you to listen to me very carefully. I'm listening. Those contract numbers go to a company called Hargrove Energy Solutions. They hold security infrastructure contracts in Iraq, Qatar, and the UAE. They are also, and this is the part that is not in any briefing you've been given, currently holding short positions on Gulf crude futures worth approximately $14 billion. She stood against the concrete wall in the pre-dawn dark and let that settle. Short positions, bets that oil prices would fall or that the supply would be disrupted enough to spike them in the short term before collapsing. Either way, someone was positioned to make extraordinary amounts of money from exactly the kind of chaos she was currently standing in the middle of. The crates, she said. They're not arming Quds Force. No, Grizz said. Someone is using Quds Force as the delivery mechanism and Vaziri as the face. A pause. He may not even know. She looked at the stack of crates in the early light, at the batch numbers that connected an oil war to a stock position to a supply chain that ran through the U.S. defense contracting system. Who authorized the jamming, Grizz? He didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was flat and very controlled. That, he said, is the question that's going to get both of us killed if we ask it too loudly. The desert was lightening around her. Somewhere to the northeast, the collapsed pump housing sat quiet on its ridge. She looked at it for a long moment. The stillness she'd seen during the sandstorm. The discipline of it. Whoever had been on that ridge hadn't been watching the pipeline. They'd been watching her. She was halfway back to the pump tower when the shot came. Not at her. Not quite. The round cracked through the air approximately 18 inches to her left. Close enough that she felt the pressure wave against her cheek. Close enough that the supersonic snap made her left ear ring for the next 4 seconds. She dropped flat behind a section of collapsed pipeline without thinking, rifle coming up, cheek welding to stock before she'd consciously registered the decision. The shot had come from the northeast, from the ridge. She pressed herself into the sand and did not move. Every instinct said move. Get up, displace, change your position before he adjusts his zero. Every instinct was wrong. Moving created signature. Movement in flat terrain was a death sentence against a trained eye. She stayed flat, breathed shallow, and ran the geometry. The round had come from approximately 600 meters. Northeast ridge, the collapsed pump housing she'd been tracking all night. The heat signature that had been too still to be anything but a person. He had her position dialed. That was the problem. If he'd wanted to kill her, she'd already be dead. A miss at 600 meters by a sniper who'd been in Overwatch all night wasn't a miss. It was a message. I see you. She stayed flat for 4 minutes. Then she began to move. Not toward cover, not away, but laterally, inches at a time, using the pipeline segment as concealment while she worked herself toward a secondary berm 20 meters to her south. It took 11 minutes to cover 20 meters. She'd done it in silence, with her rifle slung across her arms, moving the way a person moves when they know they're in someone's optic, and they want to appear to disappear rather than run. She made the berm. She got behind it. She keyed the radio. Grizz, I've got a counter sniper. Single shot. Warning. Northeast ridge, 600 meters. This is the contact I logged during the storm. The silence on Grizz's end lasted 3 seconds. Did you say warning shot? Affirmative. He had the angle. He didn't take it. That's intentional. Grizz's voice dropped. He's not trying to kill you yet. He's trying to spook you into moving, into making a mistake. I know. She held position behind the berm, working her scope over the ridge. Who is he? A pause. Let me make a call. Stay where you are. Grizz came back on the radio 7 minutes later. In those 7 minutes, the sun had finished rising. The desert had gone from dark orange to pale gold. The burning sections of pipeline were still smoking, thick black columns rising straight in the calm morning air. The militia activity from the night had settled, fewer vehicles moving. The compound around the secondary pump station was quiet in a way that suggested people inside, not absence. His name is Sergeant Major Dariush Khaledi, Grizz said. Iranian Revolutionary Guard, Special Reconnaissance. He operates under the call sign Shaheen, the Falcon. Shaheen, she repeated. He's 41 years old. He's been the primary counter-sniper asset for IRGC Special Operations for the past 9 years. Official confirmed kills, 22. Actual number is believed to be significantly higher. A pause. Maya, this man was trained, not by Iran, by us. He spent 8 months at a joint intelligence sharing program in 2007, before the program was shut down. He knows our doctrine. He knows our techniques. He knows how we think. She absorbed that. What's he doing here? He was deployed specifically for this operation. His assignment, as best we can determine, is to prevent any coalition observer from getting close enough to document what's actually happening in this corridor. Another pause, longer. He was sent here to kill you, Maya, or whoever they sent, but he knows you now. He's identified you as a long-range asset, not infantry. He's going to treat this like a duel. Because it is a duel. Because it is, Grizz agreed. And he's going to be patient. He's going to try to move you before he kills you. Get you off your ground onto his. She looked at the ridge. In the morning light, she could see the structure more clearly. Open framework of corroded steel girders, partial walls, multiple apertures he could use without committing to a single firing position. Good ground, complicated sightlines. A sniper's position chosen by someone who understood how snipers thought. He picked that position last night, she said. Before you arrived, yes. She thought about that. He'd been in position before her insertion, which meant someone had told him, or told someone who told him, that an asset was coming, and approximately where that asset would set up. Grizz, he knew where I was going to be. The pause on Grizz's end told her he'd already thought about this. There may be a leak in the operational chain. I'm working on that assumption. Don't use primary frequencies more than necessary. She switched to her backup channel and stayed there. By 0800 hours, the oil fields were on fire. Not just the pipeline detonations from the night before, those had been controlled, relatively contained. What started at 800 was different. 3 of the working pump stations in the southern cluster ignited within 40 minutes of each other, the fires spreading laterally along surface oil contamination that had been building in the soil for decades. The gas flare towers, which had been burning steadily all night, were now competing with a dozen secondary fires that generated their own upward thermal columns. The smoke changed everything. She'd moved twice since the warning shot, once to a secondary position behind a low concrete berm, and then to a third position she'd pre-identified on her initial approach, the base of a demolished water tower, 200 meters west of the original pump tower, which gave her a different angle on the ridge and partial overhead cover from a surviving section of the tower's steel tank. It wasn't ideal. It was survivable. The thermal problem was severe. The oil fires produced heat signatures on an industrial scale. Her thermals, which had been useful enough during and after the sandstorm, were now essentially unreadable for anything within a kilometer of the fires. Everything was hot. Burning crude oil, superheated pipeline sections, concrete that had been absorbing fire radiance for hours. The heat mirage coming off the southern ground was so severe she could see it rippling at ground level through her conventional optic. At 600 meters, in these conditions, even conventional optical identification was degraded. She could identify large objects, vehicles, groups of personnel. Individual positive identification at that range through heat shimmer was marginal. The Falcon would know this. If he was still on the ridge, and she believed he was using the chaos methodically. The fires that were destroying her thermal advantage were giving him cover for displacement. She'd been unable to acquire any positive signature from the ridge since the warning shot. He could have moved 3 times in that window, and she'd have no way of knowing. She keyed her radio. "Grizz, I'm flying blind. Thermals are useless. He can maneuver without me tracking him." "I know. I've got the same problem with the overhead feed. Too much thermal noise." A pause. "The fires aren't accidental, Maya. Someone triggered them deliberately this morning, covering Kaladi's movements. And something else. I'm seeing vehicle activity in the northern sector, beyond what you can observe from your position. Something's moving." "Vaziri?" "Possibly. I can't confirm without eyes on the ground. The drone I had up is down. Heat damage to the optical system." A pause. "I'm working on getting another asset into the area. It's going to take time." "How much time?" 4 hours, maybe 6. She looked at the burning desert around her. 4 to 6 hours, blind, with a trained counter-sniper somewhere in the terrain ahead of her, and a target that was moving. "All right," she said. Then I moved closer. "Maya, I can't observe at range without optics that work. I need to close the distance to the objective area. Get inside the smoke line where the heat differential is smaller." A pause. "That puts you inside Kaladi's engagement envelope." "I'm already inside it. He chose that range intentionally." She pulled her pack straps tighter and checked her magazine. 30 rounds chambered, 4 spares on her chest rig. Sidearm, blade, the long gun. "He wants me static and scared. I'm going to disappoint him." She moved north for 90 minutes. Moving through active fire ground was a specific kind of misery. The heat wasn't uniform. It spiked and dropped depending on proximity to burn points, wind direction, the particular chemistry of what was burning. Her eyes streamed constantly from the acrid smoke. The sand that the wind was carrying mixed with carbon particulate from the fires and coated every surface, including the inside of her nose and the back of her throat. She stopped every 12 to 15 minutes, found cover, and observed. Each stop was a risk assessment. Was she being tracked? Had she picked up a shadow? The Falcon's methodology, from what Grizz had described, was patience, establish position, wait for the target to come to you, let stress and environment do the work of narrowing options. She couldn't counter-stalk him directly without knowing where he was. What she could do was move unpredictably, change her pace, use the smoke columns as terrain rather than as obstacles. She reached the northern pump station cluster at approximately 1,000 hours. The complex was larger than it had appeared in the overhead imagery. Multiple interconnected buildings, a network of elevated pipeline catwalks, storage tanks arranged in a semicircle around a central processing hub. The perimeter fencing was decades old and mostly collapsed. The buildings themselves were a mix of eras, some dating to the 1970s original construction, some more recent additions that were newer and in better condition. The newer additions were the interesting ones. She found a position in the shadow of a storage tank's curved base, prone, scope working across the complex. The militia presence here was heavier than she'd expected, at least 20 personnel visible, with a pattern of movement that suggested more inside the buildings. Two vehicles she didn't recognize from the night's observation. Security posture was elevated. Something had changed here in the last several hours. She worked her scope across the building faces, looking for the specific structure she'd been briefed as a possible command point. The briefing had been vague. Possible command infrastructure at grid reference Delta 9. She hadn't been given blueprints or floor plans. She was finding this on her own. The building she was looking for turned out to be the one she'd least expected. Not one of the newer additions, the oldest structure in the complex, a heavy concrete block building from the original 1970s construction, with walls a meter thick and very few windows. That kind of construction didn't happen by accident. Somebody had built this facility knowing that things in this region had a tendency to explode and had built accordingly. The original engineers, whoever they were, had created something that would survive almost anything short of a direct airstrike. It had a new door, heavy steel recently installed, and running along the building's eastern face, at ground level, a conduit bundle she hadn't expected. Communications lines and power cables, not weathered, not corroded, new, running underground toward the east, toward the direction of the oil terminal complex, several kilometers away. She photographed it. She logged the grid. She was about to key her radio when she heard the voice. Male, speaking Farsi, which she didn't have enough of to translate in real time. Coming from a ventilation grill in the building's north face, approximately 6 meters from her position. She moved to it. She pressed herself against the concrete wall, slow and careful, and put her ear as close to the grill as she could without touching it. The voice was clearer here. One speaker, then a second, back and forth. She activated the audio capture module on her comm unit and began recording. She caught one word she recognized, then another. Her Farsi was limited. She'd gotten conversational basics in pre-deployment training, but some words were the same across contexts. Numbers, quantities, the word for when. The word that meant terminal or endpoint, which could refer to a pipeline terminus or to something else entirely. And one phrase she was confident about because she'd heard it in a different context 3 years ago from a Kurdish interpreter who'd had to translate it under very different circumstances. The switch cannot be stopped once it is started. She pulled back from the grill. She got behind the storage tank and keyed her radio on the backup frequency. Grizz, I'm at Delta 9. I've found the command structure, sending you imagery and audio capture now. Copy, what did you hear? Not enough, but they mentioned a switch, a trigger, something that can't be stopped once initiated. She paused. And Grizz, the building has new comms lines running east, toward the terminal complex. A silence. Then, how new? Recent weeks, maybe, not years. Another silence. When Grizz spoke again, his voice had the particular quality she'd learned to recognize as him processing something he'd already suspected but hadn't wanted to say aloud. There were reports 3 weeks ago. An engineering team was seen working in this corridor. The cover story was pipeline maintenance. Cover story for what? I don't know yet. A pause. But Maya, the building you're describing, with those comms lines running to the terminal, that's not a command post. She looked at the heavy concrete walls, the new cables, the recently installed door. Then what is it? A relay station, Grizz said. Something is being controlled from inside that building, remotely. A pause. And those cables running to the terminal. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. She looked at the conduit bundle again, at the cables running east toward the terminal. She thought about the phrase she'd recorded. The switch cannot be stopped once it is started. She'd been looking at this as a command and control node. She needed to look at it differently. This wasn't where Vaziri commanded the operation. This was where the operation commanded itself. She held position for another 40 minutes, continuing to record the audio from the ventilation grill. Her Farsi wasn't good enough to catch everything, but her audio module was capturing it cleanly, and she was getting fragments, enough to build a partial picture. She sent the audio file to Grizz in compressed packets on the burst protocol, and while he worked on a translation, she worked on what she could derive from tone and context. Two speakers. One was confident, measured, speaking at length. The other was shorter in his responses, occasionally sharp, occasionally something that sounded like hesitation. The confident speaker, she came to believe, was not Vaziri. The voice was wrong, the register different from the man she'd seen at the pipeline. The hesitant speaker might be. If it was Vaziri, he sounded like a man who didn't entirely control what he was in the middle of. Grizz came back 22 minutes into her observation. I've got a partial translation. The primary speaker, the confident one, is discussing oil price projections. Specifically, he's discussing the effect of a sustained infrastructure disruption on Gulf crude spot prices. He's talking about it in terms of a calculated outcome, not a side effect. A pause. Maya, this is not a military briefing. It's a financial briefing. A financial briefing in an Iranian militia command bunker. A financial briefing that is being conducted, based on the technical terminology, by someone with commodity trading experience. Another pause. There's a phrase, the translator I used flagged it specifically. The speaker said something like, the positions are already placed. The infrastructure events will move the markets in the direction we need. What matters is the sequence and the timing. She pressed her back against the concrete wall and stared at the desert sky. Positions. Placed. The direction we need. Sequence and timing. Hargrove Energy Solutions. $14 billion in short positions on Gulf crude. Grizz, who is in that room? I don't know. But you have a theory. The pause was long. There are people in the contracting world who have been watching this corridor for 2 years, watching the geopolitical instability, watching the Israel-Iran tensions build. People who have the right relationships in both Washington and Tehran, not because they serve either government, but because they serve capital. Because instability in the right place at the right time is worth more money than most people can conceive of. And Vaziri? Vaziri is the mechanism. He has the access, the personnel, the cover of ideology. He may believe he's serving Iranian strategic interests. He may not realize he's also serving someone else's financial interests simultaneously. A pause. Or he may know exactly what he's part of. That's what I can't determine. She thought about the man at the pipeline, the way he'd watched the fires, the look of someone watching something they'd expected, but not fully chosen. I don't think he knows, she said. Why? Because of the way he looked at the pipeline burning last night. That wasn't satisfaction. That wasn't a man watching a plan execute. She paused, working out the words. That was a man watching something he started that he's not sure he can stop. Grizz was quiet for a moment. That distinction matters, he said finally, because of what I've just confirmed from the audio. Maya, there's a detonation sequence, what they're calling the switch. It's tied to the terminal complex. If it triggers, it won't just damage the infrastructure. She waited. It will ignite the primary oil storage facility at the terminal. 14 storage tanks, fully loaded. The explosive yield from a simultaneous detonation would be significant enough to be catastrophic for anyone within a 2-kilometer radius. A pause. And the terminal complex sits adjacent to a civilian resettlement zone, approximately 4,000 people. She closed her eyes for 1 second. Then she opened them because the desert didn't care what she felt about it, and neither did the situation. When? Unknown, but the sequence is automated. Once initiated, it runs on its own timeline, independent of human control. A pause. That's what the phrase means. The switch cannot be stopped once it is started. She'd been at the complex for 3 hours when the trucks arrived. She heard them before she saw them. Commercial vehicles, heavy, coming from the eastern approach road. She repositioned to a new angle around the storage tank's base and got her scope on the main compound entrance. 7 trucks, large, the kind used for bulk transport. They pulled into the compound in a slow, practice convoy and stopped in a line near the main processing building. The militia personnel who came to meet them were not in a fighting posture. They were organized, efficient, performing what appeared to be a routine task. The people who got out of the trucks were not fighters. Families, women in hijabs, children ranging from what looked like toddlers to teenagers, older men. They moved slowly, some of them helping others, some carrying bundles of belongings. They looked like what they were, civilians who had been displaced and were being placed somewhere specific. Inside the compound, she counted 46 people in the first 2 trucks. She stopped counting after that because the number wasn't the point. The point was that the militia was placing civilian non-combatants inside the operational perimeter of a facility that was housing military equipment, command infrastructure, and, somewhere in that relay station, whatever system controlled the terminal detonation sequence. Human shields. It was the oldest move in the playbook and the most effective because it worked. It worked because the people holding the guns on the other side had consciences, and because the people placing the civilians knew that and used it. She keyed the radio. Grizz, they're moving civilians into the compound. Large numbers. Families. How many? Counting at least 90, maybe more. They're still unloading. A long silence. This is intentional. They know we've identified the facility. This is a response to surveillance. A pause. Maya, with civilians in that perimeter, you cannot engage the compound directly. Any fire mission, any direct action against the command infrastructure, it becomes a massacre. I know. She watched a small girl, maybe 6 years old, being helped down from a truck by a woman who was probably her mother. The girl was carrying something, a stuffed animal, gray and battered. The girl looked around the compound with the careful, uncertain expression of a child who understood that something was wrong, but didn't have the framework to define it. I know, she said again. The mission profile just became significantly more complicated. The mission profile, she said, was already significantly more complicated than they told me it was. She tracked the civilian distribution across the compound. They were being moved into the main processing buildings, the largest structures with the most interior space. Kept away from the relay station, kept away from the militia equipment, kept in the places that any precision strike would have to avoid. She pulled back from her observation point and ran the geometry in her head. The relay station, the control node for whatever was wired to the terminal. That was the critical infrastructure. If the switch was automated and couldn't be stopped once started, then the relay station was where the sequence could be interrupted, before it was initiated. Destroying the relay station would sever the connection between Vaziri's command bunker and the terminal's detonation system. But the relay station was in the compound. The compound now had 90+ civilians in it. She needed a shot angle that didn't exist yet. Grizz, the relay station is the key. If I can destroy it before the sequence initiates, I break the circuit. The terminal is safe. What's your shot problem? Civilians in the compound perimeter. I need an angle that clears the civilian concentration. The relay building is on the northern face. If I can get north of the compound, I have a clear shot at the communications conduit array on the building's exterior. Destroy that array, I destroy the relay function. From the north, a pause. Maya, north of the compound is open ground, no cover. It's inside Kaladi's patrol zone. She'd already worked that out. I know. So you're telling me your only shot at the relay requires you to set up in the middle of the Falcons' territory. Yes. Grizz breathed out slowly. Let me think about this. Think fast, she said, because if Vaziri initiates that sequence before I disrupt the relay, we're not talking about a mission failure, we're talking about 4,000 people. She moved north. She hadn't waited for Grizz to finish thinking, because thinking was a luxury, and the terrain north of the compound had a specific problem she needed to address while she still had light. The Falcon had been in her sector for at least 12 hours. He was trained. He was patient. He had home ground advantage in the sense that he'd chosen this territory, had mapped it before she arrived, knew where the angles were and where the dead ground was. She was working from observation and inference. What she had was this. She'd seen his firing position once, the northeast ridge pump housing, at 600 meters from her original overwatch. She'd seen him make one shot, a warning. Since then, silence and displacement. He would not be on the ridge now. He would have moved. The question was which direction. She thought about what Grizz had told her. He was trained by U.S. methodology. He thinks the way we think. What did she do when she displaced after a reveal? She moved perpendicular to her original axis, then found new elevated ground with sightlines on her previous position. She put distance between herself and her last known location while maintaining observation. She would assume he'd done the same. The ridge to the northeast was compromised. He'd know she'd logged it. He would have moved south or southwest toward the compound area, toward where she was likely to go. He'd be looking for her moving north, because north was where the tactical necessity was. She moved north anyway, but not directly. She moved in an L shape, west first, 200 meters, then north, using a dry irrigation channel as cover. The channel was 3 feet deep and mostly empty, with a residue of sand and old concrete debris at the bottom. She stayed low and moved at the pace that hurt, slow enough to be quiet, fast enough to get to a firing position before the day got worse. The first mirror flash came when she was 150 meters into the northward leg of her route, high to her southeast. A brief, controlled reflection, not sunlight off a random surface, the wrong angle for that. Someone using a signal mirror or the optic of a scope deliberately to let her know they'd seen her. She didn't stop. Stopping was what he wanted. She kept moving, slightly faster now, because he'd just told her 2 things. He was to her southeast, which meant she'd guessed his displacement correctly, and he was still at distance, which meant she had time. The irrigation channel ended at a concrete culvert that ran under an elevated pipeline section. The area around it was a maze of pipe supports and maintenance platforms. Elevated steel structure, lots of vertical cover, multiple angles. She liked it. She climbed. She went up a maintenance ladder on the west side of the pipeline elevation, staying on the non-exposed face, and reached a platform approximately 20 feet up. From here, she had sightlines to the north, toward the open ground and the relay station, and coverage of the approach behind her to the southeast. She set her rifle. She waited. 3 minutes passed. A sound she registered before she consciously identified it. A small piece of metal debris displaced. The sound of something that weighed about the same as a boot, pressing on a surface that didn't want to be pressed on. He was closer than she'd calculated. She stayed motionless. Motionless was the only counter to a trained observer at close range. Movement created edge detection. Stillness just required him to see her shape in a landscape full of shapes. She was wearing desert pattern. The platform was corroded steel and rust. Color match wasn't perfect, but it was workable. Another minute. Then, to her southeast, on the ground, a shadow moved. Not a person, the shadow of a person, crossing a narrow band of sunlight between 2 pipe supports. Maybe 70 meters. She tracked the shadow's origin point with her peripheral vision. Not looking directly, peripheral vision was more sensitive to movement than central vision in bright light. Another thing they taught you that stayed true forever once you knew it. The Falcon was 70 meters to her southeast and moving west. He was trying to get an angle on her northern approach route. He wasn't looking up. She breathed out slowly and didn't move. He stopped. She could see him now, not clearly, a shape between pipe supports, crouched, rifle up, working his scope across the ground to her north, looking for where she was going rather than finding where she was. She had maybe 30 seconds before he swept back and found her platform. She made herself wait anyway, because 30 seconds wasn't enough. She needed him to commit to a position, not to be between positions, and a moving man was harder to engage and harder to read. She needed him still. He moved again, west, then north, closing the distance to the open ground beyond the pipeline elevation. He was trying to get ahead of her. He thought she was still in the irrigation channel. He stopped again, 20 meters west of her position, at the base of a pipe support column. He was looking north, scope up, patient. She had the angle. She put her crosshairs on him and made herself stop. She did not shoot. Not because she lacked the shot. She had it, clean. 70 meters was not a challenge. She didn't shoot because killing the Falcon right now, with the mission unresolved, with the relay station still operational, and the civilian population inside the compound, resolved one problem while leaving all the others exactly where they were. She needed him removed from the board, but she needed the relay station more. If she fired now, she gave up her position. The shot would echo across the complex. Every militia soldier in the compound would hear it and know direction. She'd be engaged from multiple points within minutes, and she'd never reach the angle she needed. She watched him. He scanned the ground to the north. He was good, methodical, slow, the scope moving in measured increments. He was also, she noted, watching the wrong area. He had her pegged 30 meters further north than she was. She let him look. Then she began, centimeter by centimeter, to move. The drone went down at 11:34 hours. She heard Grizz swear, not loudly, but she caught it, and she'd never heard him swear before. Then, "I've lost the overhead feed. The replacement drone just went down. Heat damage to the optical system." "Where?" "Approximately 2 kilometers north of your position. It was trying to get a look at the terminal complex." A pause, and something tight in his voice she didn't like. "Maya, I need to tell you something." She'd gotten herself off the pipeline platform during the Falcon's distraction and was now behind a secondary berm south of the open ground, 70 meters from where she needed to be. She pressed herself flat and listened. "The relay station. I've been trying to access the schematic through back channels since you sent me the imagery. I reached out to a contact at CENTCOM Intelligence." A pause. "He came back to me 20 minutes later and told me the inquiry had been flagged. Someone in the intelligence chain knew I was asking." "Which means someone in the intelligence chain is watching this operation." "Yes." Grizz paused again. She could hear him deciding how much to say. "Maya, I've been in this business for 40 years. I've seen a lot of operations that were not what they appeared. This one," he stopped. "Hargrove, the contract numbers you found. I've been running those through my own channels. The company has a board member who sits on 3 different defense intelligence advisory committees. Those committees have access to operational planning for coalition activities in the Gulf Corridor." She understood what he was saying. They knew we were coming. They may have known an operation was being mounted. The specifics, your insertion point, your overwatch position, that could have come from the operational planning chain, which means the Falcon knew where to be before I arrived because someone told him. She thought about the heat signature during the sandstorm, the stillness. He was waiting for me specifically. "It's possible." A long pause. "Maya, I need you to understand something. If Hargrove has penetrated the operational planning chain at a level that allows them to tip off an IRGC counter-sniper asset, then the mission parameters I was given might not be real. The mission parameters were designed to get you here, Grizz said quietly, into this corridor, where you'd observe exactly what's happening, where command would have justification to authorize a strike on the relay station, a strike that would, incidentally, destroy all physical evidence of the contractor involvement and the financial positioning. She lay flat on the desert ground and let that move through her. The pipeline fires were still burning to the south. The smoke drifted north over her position, carrying the smell of crude oil and something acidic she couldn't identify. They sent me here to get killed or to clean up, she said. Either way, the evidence disappears. That is my assessment, Grizz said. And I want to be clear, I did not know this when I was assigned to this operation. I was given the same briefing you were. A pause. Maya, I'm going dark for the next 90 minutes. I have to make some calls I can't make on monitored frequencies. Keep recording, keep observing. Don't shoot anyone you don't have to. And the relay station? Hold on that until I get back to you. A pause. I'm sorry, I know that's not what you need to hear. The radio went silent. She was alone, completely alone, in a burning desert with a trained counter-sniper 40 meters away, and a detonation system she couldn't approach, and a mission she now knew she hadn't been told the truth about. She thought about Grizz, making calls he couldn't make on monitored frequencies. She thought about a 62-year-old retired Marine deciding, somewhere off the grid, whether what he knew was enough to act on. She thought about 4,000 people sleeping near a terminal complex that had been wired without their knowledge to serve someone else's financial positions. Then she stopped thinking and started moving. Grizz came back at 13:12 hours. His voice was different, not shaken. She didn't think Grizz was capable of being shaken, not in the way that showed in a voice, but something in the register had settled, the way a man's voice settles when he's made a decision and stopped arguing with himself about it. I talked to 3 people, he said, one at DIA, one at State, one who doesn't have a title I can tell you. A pause. Here's what I know. She was in position behind a collapsed machinery block, approximately 90 meters from the relay station's northern face. She'd found it, the angle she'd been looking for. The communications conduit array on the northern face was visible, unobstructed, at approximately 110 meters. A shot she could make in her sleep. Hargrove Energy Solutions has been engineering this corridor crisis for 6 months, Grizz said. They identified Vaziri as a useful instrument 18 months ago. They've been feeding him intelligence, resources, and what he thinks is Iranian government authorization. He believes he's operating on behalf of the IRGC Strategic Command. He's not. He's operating on behalf of a board of directors in Houston. He doesn't know. He suspects something is wrong. That's what I hear in his behavior. That's why he looked the way he looked at the pipeline. A pause. Hargrove needed the chaos in this corridor to drive a specific market outcome. They also needed a cleanup. Anyone who can document the contractor involvement, the supply chain, the financial positions, the engineering work on the detonation system, anyone who knows what's actually here is a problem for them. So they flagged your inquiry to CENTCOM. And before that, they made sure the operational planning chain for this mission had their access. They knew the mission was coming. They positioned Khalidi to deal with the human intelligence problem. A pause. Me and you. She absorbed that. The detonation system, Hargrove built it? The engineering team that installed the cables and the relay controls 3 weeks ago was a Hargrove subcontractor. Working under a pipeline maintenance cover, Vaziri's people let them in because they were told it was authorized by Tehran. He paused. Vaziri doesn't have the activation codes. The system is designed to trigger on an external signal, one that comes from outside his control. He can initiate the arming sequence, but the actual detonation trigger is held by someone else. Hargrove, or someone acting for them. A pause. Maya, the terminal is insured for $6 billion. The policy contains a war clause that pays out at full value in the event of destruction attributable to armed conflict. The same policy was written by an insurance syndicate that also holds positions in Hargrove's Gulf Infrastructure Fund. She stared at the relay station, at the conduit bundle running east, at the cables that connected a concrete bunker in a burning desert to a terminal full of oil and a resettlement zone full of families. They're going to trigger it themselves, she said, when the market timing is right. They'll use Vaziri as the triggering mechanism, blame it on Iranian proxy action, collect the insurance, and the futures positions pay out on top of that. Yes, and 4,000 people. Collateral, Grizz said. It was the flattest, emptiest word she'd ever heard him say. In their modeling, it's a political and reputational cost that can be managed. The media narrative would be established before anyone asked the right questions. She put her forehead against the cool of the rifle stock for exactly 2 seconds. Then she raised it. The relay station, she said. If I destroy the conduit array on the northern face, I sever the connection to the terminal. Yes, but Maya, without the relay intact, there's no physical evidence chain connecting Hargrove to the detonation system. The cables and the relay hardware are the link. Destroying it closes the circuit for the people who need it closed. A pause. And it opens the possibility that they'll simply rebuild the connection with a different mechanism and try again. If I don't destroy it, the sequence could initiate at any moment. Yes. So either I destroy the evidence trying to protect the people, or I protect the evidence and gamble with 4,000 lives. That, Grizz said, is the choice. A pause. But Maya, there's a third option, one that requires you to stay in position and get something else first. The Falcon had found her. She didn't know exactly when, somewhere between scene 15 and her current position, he'd relocated and reacquired. She became aware of it not through direct observation, but through the specific quality of stillness that settles over a space when a skilled hunter is in it and waiting. A quieting of ambient sound, a sense of geometry, of lines and angles being calculated about you rather than by you. She held her position and ran her options. She was behind a collapsed machinery block, prone, rifle pointed north at the relay station. Behind her, to the south, the Falcon was somewhere within what she estimated was a 100-meter arc. She couldn't look south without exposing herself from the north. She couldn't move north without exposing herself to him. She was caught between two problems and could only solve one at a time. Grizz had said, "Stay in position, get something else first." What he'd meant was this. Instead of destroying the relay station, eliminating the evidence, he needed her to get inside it, or close enough to extract something from it. Photographic documentation of the control hardware, serial numbers, manufacturer codes, something that could survive the subsequent destruction and be used to trace the engineering work back to its origin. It was a good plan. It was also the kind of plan that sounded clean on a radio and looked very different in reality. She keyed her radio subvocally. "I've got Coletti behind me, south, approximately 80 to 100 meters. Grizz was quiet for a moment. "Has he engaged?" "No, he's holding, same as before. He wants me to move." "Then don't move." "I can't stay here indefinitely. The militia patrol cycle will bring personnel past this position within," she checked her range card, "approximately 40 minutes, based on what I logged this morning." "Then you have 40 minutes to do two things." Grizz paused. "First thing, document the relay hardware. Is there any approach to the station that doesn't expose you to Coletti?" She worked the angles in her head. "The western approach. If he's south and static, and I move west before moving north, I can use the storage tank row as a screen." She thought it through. "It adds 200 meters and changes my shot angle on the conduit array. I lose the clean northern sightline." "What's the shot from the western approach?" "More complicated. There's a pipeline segment between me and the array. I'd have to shoot through the gap between it and the building face." She mentally ranged it. "Maybe 130 meters instead of 110. Lateral profile instead of direct. Doable. Do that. Get imagery of the hardware first. A pause. Second thing, Khalidi. He's between me and my extraction route. I know. Grizz was quiet for a moment, and what she heard in that pause was different from his usual calculation. Something more personal. Maya, I need to tell you something about Dariush Khalidi. Now? While you're moving, listen. A pause. In 2007, when he was in the Joint Intelligence Exchange Program, I was one of the U.S. instructors. He spent 3 weeks at a facility in Qatar. I spent considerable time with him. Another pause. He was not what I expected. He was skilled, he was serious, he was also principled, in the way that good soldiers are, regardless of which flag they carry. He was not in that program because he was ordered to be. He was there because he believed that intelligence sharing between adversaries reduced the chance of miscalculation that kills civilians. She was moving now, westward, slow and careful. What happened? The program was shut down, politically inconvenient. He went back. I went back. 18 years later, here we are. A pause. He was deployed to kill you because someone in his chain of command told him you were a threat to Iranian strategic interests. He may not know the full picture any more than you did when you inserted last night. She thought about the warning shot, the careful miss. He could have killed me this morning. Yes, Grizz said, he could have. She moved along the western storage tank row, keeping low, using the curved tank surfaces as a screen. The relay station's western face came into view. A ventilation panel, a secondary access door, padlocked. And on the wall, exposed, the control hardware junction box she needed. Gray metal, new, 3 sets of cable ingress points, and what appeared to be a cellular relay antenna array mounted above it. She raised her camera module. She photographed everything. The hardware junction, the cable markings, the antenna serial numbers, which were partially legible from 130 meters with maximum magnification. She sent the image packets to Grizz in compressed bursts. She could hear him, faintly, cross-referencing in the background, typing something, talking to someone else on a second line she wasn't on. Then he came back. The antenna array, the model number you captured, SA7712C, that's a Hargrove proprietary component, custom manufactured, not commercially available. It's in their engineering catalog under Infrastructure Monitoring Systems. His voice was very controlled. Maya, that's the link. That antenna ties this relay station directly to a Hargrove-engineered system. It's not Iraqi government infrastructure. It's not Iranian. It's theirs. Built, installed, and controlled by them. I've got it documented. Send me everything you have, all of it. A pause. And Maya, I need you to know what I know now. Tell me. The detonation sequence. I've had the technical specs analyzed in the last 40 minutes by someone who knows this system architecture. The automated trigger isn't just connected to the terminal. He paused. The relay station itself is part of the arming mechanism. Destroying the conduit array doesn't just sever the connection. It completes a safety circuit in the system. The detonation sequence cannot be remotely initiated while the relay hardware is intact and reporting active. She stopped moving. Say that again. The relay station is a dead man's switch in reverse. As long as it's transmitting, the system stays armed and can be triggered. The moment it goes offline, whether because it's destroyed or because the power is cut, the automated detonation sequence locks out. It can't be triggered remotely without the relay active. She stared at the hardware junction box on the relay station's western face, at the antenna array, at the cables running east. So destroying the relay station doesn't just protect the terminal, it immediately makes the terminal safe. Immediately and irreversibly for the current configuration. They'd have to rebuild the relay to rearm the system. A pause. But destroying the relay destroys the evidence. Yes, the antenna, The junction hardware, the cable end connectors, all of it gone. Without the physical hardware, the SA7712C designation becomes a claim, not proof. Their lawyers would bury it. She thought about 4,000 people. She thought about the antenna serial number she just photographed. What if I don't have to destroy it? A pause. What do you mean? Power, she said. You said the system locks out if the relay goes offline. It doesn't have to be destroyed. It just has to go dark. She looked at the power conduit running along the building's base. If I cut the power supply to the relay station, take the hardware offline without destroying it, the detonation sequence locks, and the hardware is still there. Grizz was quiet for 4 seconds. The power supply. It runs along the eastern face of the building. I saw the conduit when I was at the ventilation grill earlier. If I can get to it, Maya, that puts you at the eastern face of the building. That's inside the compound perimeter. With 90 civilians and approximately 20 armed militia between you and it. Not if I approach from the northeast. She worked the geometry. The northeastern corner of the building is the furthest point from the civilian concentration. They were moved into the southern buildings. It's approximately 40 meters of exposed ground from the nearest pipeline cover to the northeast corner. A pause. It's the approach Kaladi would cover. Grizz absorbed that. So to cut the power without destroying the evidence, you have to go through Kaladi's territory. Yes. And he's currently between you and that approach. Yes. She checked her position. The militia patrol cycle. The angle. Everything. Grizz, I need to deal with Kaladi before I can do this. The pause that followed was long. Yes, Grizz said finally. You do. She held her current position and ran every option she had. She had the western angle on the relay station. She had the shot, 130 meters to the conduit array, clear enough to destroy the antenna and sever the transmission capability. That solved the immediate detonation threat. That also destroyed the evidence. 4,000 people safe. Hargrove walks away clean, rebuilds in a different corridor, does this again somewhere else. She had the northeast approach to the power conduit. That preserved the evidence. That required passing through 40 meters of exposed ground that the Falcon was currently covering. That required dealing with Kaladi first, which meant either killing him or something else she didn't have a word for yet. And there was a third element she hadn't resolved. Vaziri. Vaziri was in the command bunker, believing he was running an IRGC operation, not knowing the detonation sequence was controlled externally, not knowing the man he'd met in that bunker had a Houston address and a commodity trading license. At some point, Hargrove would decide the market timing was right. They'd trigger the system from outside the country, and Vaziri would be left holding the Iranian side of a catastrophe he didn't fully understand he'd been a piece of. She keyed her radio. Grizz, Vaziri. Yes. If I take the relay offline, either method, what happens to him? He loses the operational infrastructure. Without the relay, the system doesn't function. The operation collapses. A pause. He'll extract. He's not suicidal. He'll get his people out. And the civilians in the compound? If the militia extracts, the civilians can leave. They're not hostages, they're shields. Once the tactical situation changes, holding them becomes a liability. She thought about the woman helping the little girl out of the truck, about the stuffed animal, about the girl's careful, uncertain look at the compound. Grizz, is there any option where I preserve the evidence, protect the people, deal with Kaladi, and don't have to make the hard call alone? A pause, then very quietly, no. Another pause. Maya, I need to tell you something. When I went dark at 11:34, the calls I made, one of them was to a contact at the Inspector General's office, DOD. I transmitted the imagery and audio you've been sending me. All of it. A pause. They have it. Even if everything physical here is destroyed, The digital record exists in a secure channel that Hargrove cannot touch. It's not perfect. It won't be enough on its own, but it's something. She absorbed that. He'd done it quietly, without telling her, while she was moving through a burning desert with a counter-sniper 40 meters behind her. He'd been doing his own version of the mission the whole time. That changes the calculus, she said. Slightly. The physical evidence would strengthen the case, but it's not the only path. A pause. What matters right now in the next 30 minutes is those 4,000 people. She looked at the relay station, at the two angles available to her, at the exposed ground to the northeast, and what was waiting there. If I take the power approach, she said slowly, I have to get Coletti off the board first, and I have to do it without alerting the militia, which means I can't use the rifle. Silence on Grizz's end. He was a principled man in 2007, she said. 18 years ago, he was someone who believed in reducing miscalculation, in protecting civilians. She paused. Is he still that man? A very long pause. I don't know, Grizz said, but I think the warning shot this morning suggests he might be. She thought about it for one more moment. The warning shot, the deliberate miss, the patience of a man who could have ended this at 0400 hours and hadn't. Then she made her decision. She put her rifle on her back. She pulled out her radio and switched to the emergency inter-operator frequency, the one used for deconfliction between hostile forces in extremist situations, a channel that technically wasn't supposed to exist between U.S. and Iranian assets, but existed anyway because people who work in dangerous places build informal protocols for exactly this kind of moment. She keyed it. Shaheen, she said in English. My name is Carter. I think we're both standing in the middle of something that isn't what either of us was told it was. A pause. I need 3 minutes, then we can go back to trying to kill each other if you want, but I think you should hear this first. The channel was silent for 6 seconds. Then a voice, accented and careful, said, I am listening. She told him everything, as fast as she could. The contractor supply chain, the financial positions, the relay station architecture, the detonation sequence that was controlled from Houston, not Tehran, the 4,000 people 2 kilometers east, the stuffed animal in the little girl's arms. When she finished, the channel was silent for longer this time. Then, you can prove this? I have documentation. I've transmitted it to an Inspector General channel. Your people can verify the hardware in that relay station. The antenna serial number is SA7712C. It's not Iranian equipment. It's not American military equipment. It's a private contractor component. She paused. Dariush, someone used both of us to be in this place. I think we both know it. Another silence, then. The northeast approach to the power conduit. You need to cut the main supply line at the junction where it enters the building's eastern face. She closed her eyes for 1 second. The patrol, she said. I will manage the patrol, Khalidi said. You have 7 minutes. She was already moving. She moved northeast at a pace that was as close to running as she'd allow herself. Running created noise. Running created visual signature. Running was what panicked people did, and panicked people in hostile territory died in ways that were entirely preventable. She moved fast-low instead, bent at the waist, weight forward, feet placed with deliberate care on the broken ground, rifle slung diagonal across her back, with the barrel angled down so it didn't catch on anything. Khalidi had said 7 minutes. She was going to need most of them. The terrain between her western position and the relay station's northeast corner was 40 meters of open ground, with exactly 0 natural cover. She'd known that when she'd analyzed the approach. She knew it again, now, viscerally, as she reached the edge of the pipeline structure row and stopped, pressing herself against the last support column, looking at the open stretch ahead. 40 meters, in daylight, with militia in the compound 70 meters to her south. She keyed her radio. Grizz, I'm at the edge. Khalidi said he'd manage the patrol. I don't have eyes on confirmation. I don't have overhead. A pause. You're going on trust. She looked at the open ground. A principled man in 2007. A warning shot at 0400 hours. An accented voice on an emergency channel saying, I will manage the patrol. Yes, she said, I am. She went. 40 meters felt like 40 miles. She moved in a low sprint, counting her footfalls, keeping her head down, resisting every instinct to look toward the compound for the shot she was certain was coming. You couldn't react to a shot you didn't hear. Either Khaledi had managed the patrol or he hadn't, and looking wouldn't change which one was true. She hit the northeast corner of the relay building at a controlled collision, both hands on the wall, velocity absorbed, no sound except her own controlled breathing. She pressed flat against the concrete. The eastern face of the building was directly to her right. She looked south along the eastern wall. 40 meters away, the militia compound was quiet. One guard visible, near the southern processing buildings, facing away. No patrol between her and the power conduit. Khaledi had managed the patrol. She moved south along the eastern wall. The power conduit junction was where she'd calculated from the morning's observation. A heavy steel box, padlocked, mounted on the wall at shoulder height, with the main supply cable entering from the ground and 3 output lines running into the building above it. She didn't have a key. She had a blade. She didn't attack the padlock. She attacked the conduit itself. The heavy rubber-sheathed cable running from the junction box down into the ground, where it connected to a portable generator she could hear humming somewhere on the building's southern face. She worked the blade under the sheath, found the metal braid beneath, and began cutting. It took 90 seconds. The cable was thick, designed to carry significant amperage, and cutting it was work. Her forearms ached. The blade bit through the braid in sections, one strand at a time, and she kept her grip absolutely controlled because a slip here, with live current in the line, would end the mission in the most immediate way possible. The last strand parted. The humming from the generator continued, but the relay station's antenna array, which she'd seen running a slow indicator pulse from her earlier position, went dark. She looked at the wall-mounted hardware junction. The status light on the relay unit, green, steady, she'd noted it earlier, had gone red. Offline. She keyed her radio. Grizz, power is cut. Relay is offline. A pause. 3 seconds. 4. Confirmed, Grizz said, and there was something in his voice that sounded like a man exhaling for the first time in 6 hours. The antenna telemetry dropped. I'm showing the relay dark. Another pause. The detonation sequence is locked. Maya, the terminal is safe. She leaned against the concrete wall of the relay building and let herself have exactly 2 seconds of that. The terminal safe. 4,000 people who would never know what had been built beneath the floor of a geopolitical crisis to use them as variables in a financial calculation. 2 seconds. Then she heard the shot. It came from inside the compound. Not directed at her, the trajectory was wrong, and it was followed immediately by shouting. Male voices, multiple, Farsi she couldn't parse fast enough. Then a second shot, then silence more complete than the silence before the shots. Something had gone wrong with whatever Khaledi had done to manage the patrol. She moved. She went back north along the eastern wall, reached the corner, looked across the open ground she just crossed. Clear. She went across it at the same controlled sprint, hit the pipeline structure row, got herself behind cover, and got back on the radio. Shots fired in the compound. Khaledi's side. Talk to me. I don't have eyes. Grizz, tight. Are you clear of the building? Yes, back at the pipeline structures. Relay is offline. I'm clear. A pause. What happened? Unknown. I'm trying to... He stopped. Then, Maya, movement on the northern ridgeline, bearing 035 from your position. She swung her scope north-northeast. The ridgeline she'd been watching all morning, the collapsed pump housing, a figure, moving, not moving away, moving laterally along the ridge crest, in a low crouch, working west, moving toward a position that would have sight lines into the pipeline structure area where she was currently sheltering. Khalidi, not managing a patrol situation inside the compound, running. She understood in the space of 2 seconds. Whatever Khalidi had done to manage the patrol, it hadn't been clean. He'd been made, or the patrol had been early, or something had gone wrong in the timing, and now he was extracting under contact, and the militia inside the compound knew there'd been a security breach at the building's perimeter. They would be looking. They would find the cut power cable, and they would begin moving outward. She had minutes before the compound's security posture became an active search. She keyed her radio. Grizz, Khalidi is on the north ridgeline, moving west. He's extracting under contact. Copy. A pause. Maya, the militia is going to push outward from the compound in the next few minutes. You need to move to your extraction point. I know. She kept her scope on Khalidi's movement. He was fast. She'd known he would be, a man with his background. But he was also moving in the open along the ridge crest because the alternative was the southern slope, which put him back toward the compound. He was choosing speed over concealment. He knew the same clock was running. She held her scope on him for a moment longer than she needed to. He'd told her where the power conduit was. He'd managed the patrol. He'd used a joint intelligence framework, a relationship with a former U.S. instructor, and whatever personal calculation he'd made about principled action versus orders. And he'd put himself inside an Iranian militia compound and removed a guard from the board so she could cut a wire. He was now running along a ridge in daylight with militia soldiers behind him. She put her scope on the ridgeline south of his position and worked it methodically, looking for pursuit, looking for anyone who'd made it out of the compound fast enough to have an angle on him. There, 2 figures, south of the ridge, moving upslope, moving fast. They'd be on the crest in under 2 minutes, and they'd have line of sight on Khalidi's back before he reached the ridge's western terminus. She ranged them, 780 meters, upslope, which added complexity, a slight upward angle adjustment, wind negligible. Ground between her and them was broken terrain that wouldn't affect the round after muzzle exit. She could take both shots before they crested the ridge. She made the first shot without further deliberation. The round traveled 780 meters in just under a second. The lead figure dropped. The second figure, trained, dropped flat immediately. Good instincts. But flat on an upslope meant exposed to her angle in a way that flat on level ground did not. She adjusted 2 inches left and made the second shot. The slope was clear. Grizz, 2 militia, south slope of North Ridge, engaging Khalidi's extract. Down. Copy. A pause. Are there more? She swept the south slope. Not yet. Compound personnel are still organizing. She watched Khalidi reach the ridge's western terminus and drop below the crest line. Gone. Into dead ground where she couldn't follow him and the militia couldn't see him. Moving away. He was going to make it. She allowed herself exactly one thought about that. Then she put it away and got to work. Extraction. What's my route? Primary LZ is compromised. Militia are pushing toward it. Secondary LZ is 3 kilometers west-northwest. Grid Echo 4. A pause. I've got a helicopter spinning up. 40 minutes. Can you make 3 kilometers in 40 minutes on foot? She looked at the terrain. Burning oil ground. Broken infrastructure. Active militia searching outward from a compound that now knew something had happened. 3 kilometers in 40 minutes was not an exercise run. It was a fighting withdrawal through a hostile search cordon. I'll make it, she said. She moved west first, fast, low, using the pipeline structure row as her axis. The smoke from the burning fields was actually helping now. The same thermal chaos that had blinded her optics all morning was providing cover for her movement, the dark columns reducing visibility across open ground to the point where a single figure moving through the industrial debris wasn't easily picked up at range. She was 400 meters west when the first militia search element appeared behind her. 4 personnel, on foot, working outward from the compound in a spread formation. Professional spacing, 5 meters between each man, sweeping in a line. Someone had organized them quickly. She noted that, filed it. A well-organized search cordon on short notice meant leadership that worked under pressure. She adjusted her pace and her route, northwest instead of west, adding distance from the search line while keeping her vector pointed toward the extraction grid. The terrain ahead was increasingly open, the pipeline structure row thinning out as she moved away from the main complex. Less cover, more exposure. She found a new axis, a series of earthen berms that had been constructed decades ago as blast deflection walls between pump stations. They were low, maybe 3 feet high, and eroded, but they ran roughly in her direction and gave her something to move behind. She counted militia positions as she moved. The search cordon behind her was expanding. 2 additional personnel had joined the 4 she'd initially identified. Now 6, pushing west in a disciplined line. Ahead of her to the north, she caught a vehicle moving, a technical truck, probably responding to the compound security alert, driving along an access road that would intersect her route in approximately 800 meters. She changed course again, south-southwest, cutting below the vehicle's projected path, accepting that it would add time. Her radio clicked. Grizz! Vehicle moving, north. Changing to south-southwest to clear it. Copy. I see it on... He stopped. Maya, I've got something on comms. Stand by. She kept moving. The berm line angled south and she followed it, staying as low as the terrain allowed. Her legs were burning now. She'd been on her feet in combat posture for approximately 11 hours with minimal water and no food since the flight in, and the body's accounting for that was beginning to come due. She drank from her hydration reservoir without stopping, kept moving. Maya, Grizz was back, and his voice had something new in it, something controlled in a way that meant the thing being controlled was significant. The contact I made at Inspector General, DOD, he just came back to me on a secure line. Timing, she said. Go. The documentation I transmitted, the imagery, the audio, the serial numbers, the financial positioning data, it's been flagged at the Inspector General's level as a credible referral for investigation. A pause. They're opening a formal inquiry into Hargrove Energy Solutions. It'll be months before anything public happens, maybe longer. These things move slowly. Another pause. But it's moving. She ran the last 70 meters across open ground to the next berm line, dropped behind it, and pressed her back against the earthen wall. Good, she said when she had breath for it. There's more. Grizz paused. The Hargrove board member who sits on the intelligence advisory committees. He's been placed on administrative leave pending the inquiry. His access to operational planning information has been suspended. Another pause. Whoever tipped off Khalidi about this operation, that channel is now closed. She thought about Khalidi on the western ridge, dropping into dead ground, going somewhere she didn't know. She thought about a 41-year-old Iranian soldier who'd made a decision in the middle of a burning oil field that had nothing to do with the country he served and everything to do with the person he decided to be. She hoped he made it wherever he was going. How far to Echo 4? She asked. 1.8 kilometers. You've got 22 minutes. She got up and ran. She almost made it clean. She was 600 meters from the extraction LZ, working along a drainage channel that gave her covered approach toward the open flat ground where the helicopter would set down, when she heard movement ahead. Single person, on foot, moving south toward her, along the same drainage channel. She stopped, pressed against the channel wall. Rifle up. The movement stopped. Both of them, still. Mutual awareness without visual contact. The channel was deep enough that the person ahead of her couldn't see her silhouette from their position, and she couldn't see theirs. This was the worst geometry. Two people who knew the other was there, neither with a shot, separated by maybe 20 meters of covered ground. She waited. The other person waited. She listened. Breathing pattern. Controlled. Measured. Trained. This wasn't militia infantry. The footfall she'd heard before contact had been precise. Light. Economical. She moved her eye toward the channel floor. In the sand at the base of the eastern wall, a narrow band of afternoon light was coming in over the channel's edge, just enough to see the shadow of anyone on the western wall. She watched the shadow band. It didn't move. Whoever was ahead of her was doing the same calculation she was, waiting for the other person to commit. She thought about her gear. Her rifle was a liability in a channel at 20 meters, too long. She thought about her sidearm. She thought about the blade. She made a decision. She put her rifle down, silently, against the channel wall. She drew her sidearm. She picked up a piece of concrete debris from the channel floor, approximately the size of her fist, and lobbed it to her right, over the channel wall, and onto the open ground beyond it, where it landed with a sound that was clearly not her moving, but was clearly a sound. The shadow moved. Instinctive, a trained person reacting to a sound stimulus, turning toward it. She was already moving forward and low, covering 10 meters in 3 seconds, and she came around a bend in the channel and found the figure turned away from her, sidearm raised toward the sound she'd made. She had the angle. She had the shot. She said, "Down, now." The figure froze. She kept her sidearm on the center of mass and moved her left hand to her radio. "Grizz, I've got a contact. Drainage channel, 600 meters south of Echo 4. Single person, armed." She looked at the figure, the body armor, the rifle, the posture. Military, not militia. A pause. "Who do I have?" Grizz didn't respond immediately. She heard him checking something. "Can you see any identification?" he asked. She looked. On the figure's left shoulder, barely visible under a layer of dust and grime, a patch. She couldn't read the text, but she could read the shape. An eagle. A specific configuration of stars. "U.S. insignia," she said. "Don't shoot," Grizz said immediately. "Maya, don't shoot. That may be a JSOC element. I've been trying to reach someone at task force for the past 2 hours. Stand by." She held her position. The figure in the channel hadn't moved. Hands slightly away from body, sidearm pointed at the ground, not dropping it but not raising it. Smart. Compliant without surrendering. "U.S. Army," she said. "Carter, LRSD, identify yourself." A pause. Then a voice, female, exhausted, controlled. "Reyes, JSOC, confirming." "Carter?" She lowered her sidearm slightly. "Confirming. We've been looking for you for 6 hours. Your primary comms dropped off network at 0412 and command assumed." She stopped. "Are you intact?" "Intact." Maya looked at her. Staff sergeant rank, similar age, similar gear configuration. A soldier who'd been in the desert for at least as long as she had, by the look of her. "What's your mission?" "Extraction and documentation. We have a collection team at Echo 4. We were told there was a relay station with contractor hardware at Grid Delta 9. We were tasked to secure the physical evidence." Maya thought about the relay station, the cut power cable, the hardware intact, offline, evidence preserved. "The relay station is intact," she said. "Power is cut, hardware is undamaged. The evidence is there." She paused. "You need to get a collection team to the eastern face of the building at Delta 9 before the militia reestablishes security on that structure. You have a window, but it's closing." Reyes was already on her own radio. "Copy. Transmitting now." She listened for a moment, then looked at Maya. They're moving. A pause. Carter, what happened in there? Maya thought about 11 hours. About burning oil fields in a sandstorm and a warning shot, and a voice on an emergency channel saying, I am listening. About 4,000 people sleeping 2 kilometers east of something they'd never been told was aimed at them. Later, she said, right now we need to move. I have a helicopter at Echo 4 in 14 minutes. They moved together. The helicopter came in fast and low from the west, flaring at the last moment with a precision that only happened when the pilot had done this many times before. The rotors kicked up a wall of desert sand. Maya went under it without breaking stride, grabbed the doorframe, and pulled herself inside in one practiced motion. Reyes was beside her. 2 other JSOC personnel she hadn't encountered before. The door gunner, silent and focused. The pilot, already pulling power before the door was fully closed. She put on the headset as the Black Hawk climbed. Grizz's voice came through immediately, as though he'd been waiting on the channel. I see you on track. Good to hear the rotors. Good to hear your voice, she said. Collection team is at Delta 9. They've entered the relay building. A pause. The hardware is intact. They're documenting now. Another pause, and she heard something in it she recognized as a man choosing his words carefully. Maya, the documentation from the relay building, combined with what I transmitted to IG this morning, it's enough. It's a chain. Physical hardware, financial positioning, supply chain records, audio capture. A pause. It's enough to build a case that won't disappear. She looked out the helicopter's window at the desert below, the burning oil fields, the smoke columns still rising, still drifting north on the afternoon wind. The compound at Delta 9, tiny from altitude, with what looked like rapid vehicle movement around its perimeter as the militia responded to a situation they were only beginning to understand. The terminal complex was visible to the east, intact, still standing, the storage tanks catching late afternoon light. The people near the terminal, she said, they're all right? All right, Grizz said. They don't know anything happened. A pause. They won't. She leaned her head back against the helicopter's frame. The vibration of the airframe traveled to the back of her skull, a familiar mechanical sensation that she'd always found oddly steadying. The world from inside a helicopter was simple. You were moving. You were above the problem. The problem was below you and getting smaller. Grizz. She said it quietly enough that the other people in the cabin couldn't hear her over the rotor noise. Hargrove? Yes. The inquiry takes months. Their lawyers are good. People who build systems this complex and this protected don't go quietly. She paused. How much of this actually holds? A long silence. She could see the desert contracting below her as the helicopter climbed and turned west. I've been in this business 40 years, Grizz said. I've seen things hold that I thought would dissolve, and I've seen things dissolve that I thought were solid. I can't promise you what a federal inquiry does or doesn't accomplish. A pause. What I can tell you is that those people at the terminal are alive tonight, that the relay station evidence is documented and in hands that aren't Hargrove's, that the operational channel that fed Khalidi his information is closed. Another pause. Sometimes that's all a day is worth. She thought about that. And Vaziri? She asked. He pulled his people out of the compound when the security situation changed, took his personnel north. A pause. Without the relay operational, and with his command infrastructure compromised, he has no functioning operation. He'll report back to Tehran. What he tells them, I don't know, but his mission here is over. Another pause. And I think when he has time to think about what happened in that bunker, about the financial briefing he sat through from a man who was not IRGC, he'll start asking questions that will make Hargrove's life complicated in ways that don't go through the Inspector General. She hadn't thought about that. Vaziri reporting to Tehran, telling them that an American contractor had run a financial operation inside an IRGC mission structure. The Iranian government's response to learning they'd been used as an instrument of U.S. corporate profit would be, to put it mildly, energetic. "You planned that," she said. "I considered it," Grizz said carefully. "I considered that Vaziri is not a stupid man, and that a not stupid man who realizes he was someone else's mechanism tends to become highly motivated to demonstrate that fact." She almost smiled. In the dark of the helicopter cabin, with burning desert below her, she almost smiled. They put her on a transport flight to Doha 48 hours later. 48 hours in a forward operating base, during which she wrote 3 separate after-action reports, gave 2 recorded statements to a DoD inquiry team that had arrived with very little fanfare and a very specific set of questions, and slept approximately 12 hours in a cot that was the most comfortable thing she'd been horizontal on in what felt like weeks. She cleaned her rifle. She inventoried her gear. She ate 4 meals that she didn't taste because she was eating for fuel rather than pleasure. She did the things that soldiers do when a mission is over and the next one hasn't started yet, which is to perform the maintenance of living with a thoroughness that fills the space where thinking would otherwise go. On the second evening, Grizz reached her on a standard encrypted line. Not the field comm she'd been using in the desert, a regular call, the kind with slightly better audio quality and slightly less urgency. "Feeling human?" he asked. "Getting there." She was sitting outside the operations building, in a camp chair, watching a dust devil work its way across the base's perimeter road. "You?" "Old," he said, "but functional." A pause. The collection team completed their documentation at Delta 9. They had approximately 3 hours before the militia re-established security on the building. They got everything they needed. Another pause. "The hardware chain is confirmed. SA7712C units are proprietary to Hargrove. Their legal team has already issued a denial. The inquiry will take time." "I know." "The board member who was placed on administrative leave has retained counsel." A pause. "It will take time," he said again. "These things do. But it's moving. It's moving." She watched the dust devil complete its arc across the perimeter road and dissipate against a concrete barrier. Just energy, she thought. Just energy without enough resistance to maintain its form. "Khaledi," she said. A pause. "No confirmed location. He was reported as killed in action by Iranian state media. An apparent firefight in the Al-Basra corridor. Circumstances vague." Another pause. "Iranian state media reports what serves Iranian state interests. What that report actually signifies..." "He's alive," she said. Grizz didn't answer immediately. That would be consistent with a report designed to close an open file without resolving it. A pause. "Wherever he is, he made his calculation in that oil field, same as you made yours. You both chose something over the order you were given. That puts you in an interesting category." She thought about the emergency channel, the accented voice. "I am listening." The 7 minutes he'd bought her with whatever he'd done inside that compound. "He didn't do it for me," she said. "No, he did it for the same reason you did it." A pause. "Because of 4,000 people who had nothing to do with an oil war and everything to do with why wars shouldn't be run like businesses." She sat with that for a moment. The desert was cooling. The sun was angling toward the horizon in the way it did in this part of the world. Fast, as if it had somewhere else to be, and the light was going amber and long across the base's flat ground. "What's next?" she asked. "For you?" "Rest. Debrief. The usual." A pause. "After that, I don't know. The world produces situations. People like us get called." Another pause, and she heard him shifting in whatever chair he was sitting in. "Maya, what you found in that corridor, the contractor involvement, the financial positioning, the way the whole structure was built, that's not unique. That's a methodology. That's a system that has been refined over time and applied in more than one place." A pause. "I've been asking that question for a long time, 40 years. I'm going to keep asking it. Is that what you do now? Ask it? I ask it and I try to put documentation in hands that can use it. Another pause. And sometimes I ask it with assets like you, who can get into places I can't get into anymore. He paused. If you're willing to keep being that. She looked at the desert, at the amber light going long, at the horizon that was the same horizon she'd been looking at for 11 hours in a burning oil field, now cleaner, cooler, without the smoke. I'm willing, she said. Good. A pause. A long one. And in it she heard something she hadn't heard from him before. Not the exhaustion of a man at the end of a hard day, but the satisfaction of a man who still believed the work was worth doing. Wars aren't fought for oil, kid. She waited. They're fought for who controls the story. She didn't answer right away. The dust devil was gone. The perimeter road was still. The transport to Doha left at 0600, and she had a cot in 12 more hours before then. And the next mission, whatever it was, wherever it was, had not yet found her name. Get some sleep, Grizz, she said. Working on it, he said. You too. The call ended. She sat in the camp chair in the cooling desert evening until the light was entirely gone, and then she went inside.